thought it might be helpful just to do a little bit of a introduction. But before I became a glioblastoma patient, I've been involved in healthcare and community work for a long time. As a community organizer, I helped get patients and people who are directly affected involved in public policy debates around healthcare. I worked as outreach director for one of the health plans in Washington State, reaching out to thousands of families and help them understand how the health plan and how healthcare could make a difference in their life. I've had the opportunity of working with several individuals who have been directly affected by cancer. Dina Knudsen is one who lost her sister to cancer, ended up playing a leadership role in reforming healthcare and playing a member on the board of her local hospital board now. And a friend of hers who we might know as the Obama boy, who is now a great community leader through, she lost her mother and became a leader for healthcare reform and sat with President Obama as he signed the AmeriCare Care. So I've had that experience, and I just mention that because I know that as an organizer and as somebody, as a professional, trying to get more people involved, both as providers and as health plan professionals and as patients, trying to get people involved. I found out later that I was myself a victim of overlooking how it would affect me personally. So I thought I was an expert in helping people understand they could interact with the healthcare coverage. Now that I've stepped in, I found out there's a whole different set of challenges. So I think it's helpful to have a patient here, and I'll share what I can from my own experience. All right. So 2 years ago, really 2 years ago this weekend, I was in Missoula, Montana, with friends. I was actually, that Saturday night, I had the opportunity to sit at dinner with a half dozen friends, one of whom was Jim, and their caregivers expected that he might have 3 or 4 days left to his life. And I was the last one at dinner, and I helped get him into bed. And I thought that might be my last chance to see him. And I walked home after that dinner, and I remember being kind of thrown off my feet at how I could be so fortunate. Here I am, almost 50 years old, running a great business, just ready to enter my second 50 years. And here Jim was experiencing his last few days, and he was so gracious. He was happy. He was laughing. He was enjoying music. He's just so courageous, and I couldn't imagine what it would take for somebody to be so courageous. And it was just a couple weeks later, actually that very next day, I spent the whole day in bed because of a really bad headache, and I was noticing my aphasia. So it was really just 2 months later that I ended up in the emergency room downstairs, sent straight to the front of the line because my aphasia was affecting my speech. I couldn't remember the word class I had just registered for University of Washington, and a family member, when I couldn't say that word, she knew it was time to go in. Straight to the front of the line. Got a CAT scan. The attending physician came in and gave me that soap opera moment where she said, "I'm sorry, it's not good news. You have a brain tumor." And then I got got to an MRI, and I had a chance to look at the pictures with Dr. Cobbs to explain what we were looking at. Conveyed great confidence. Something like, yes, we've seen this hundreds of times. We know how to deal with this. Immediately admitted into the hospital and got my surgery. I think the next day or the day after that. I remember visiting with my little boys before my surgery. I have twin boys who are now 12. They were 10 at the time. And I remember telling them that it was really my job to tell them what was going on. I told them that I had a brain tumor, that I was going to get surgery. I remember saying that I felt strong to them. And my sister asked me afterward, she said, "Wow, did you say that for your kids?" And I was like, "No, that wasn't a plan. I feel ready for this." So I had a surgery. Apparently, I was not present at the time for reasons that we might discuss. But I woke up feeling great. I just want to say this is not medical, or maybe it is, but I remember waking up the next morning feeling my cheeks were soaking. I was bawling, and it wasn't fear or anything. It wasn't depression. I was actually blown away with gratitude, a sense of love, and a sense of beauty. And other people have congratulated me for the courage that I found, and I can't take any credit for that. I just woke up with that. So that was my surgery. I was actually admitted. I had surgery on Saturday, and I was released on Sunday. And Monday I walked down to the school and explained to the principal what was happening. It's amazing how fast the person can recover there. So I found out a few weeks later, a week and a half or so later, the actual what had been found in the biopsy, and I found out it was called glioblastoma. I was told by Robin, who I think is not here. She's really great at helping me get to absorb that information at the right level for myself. Didn't tell me timelines. Said, let's just say it's not good. You should be getting things in order. That was the worst day, getting that news. And it was because I was worried about my children being left without their father. Really, that was the scariest moment. And I was lucky in that, really, within that first 24 hours, I figured out that I've had a great life, lots of terrific experiences. Almost any story that I would want to tell my kids about, there was somebody else who shared it with me. And that all I had to do was make a list. At 4 o'clock that morning, I made a list of a dozen friends who would be able to tell my kids great stories. And I sent notes to those 12 people. And I got a friend of mine who was a great writer and asked him if he would edit a legacy piece for me. And really, 24 hours after I found out my glioblastoma, that worry was off my shoulders. I knew that people would be able to take care of my kids. So I've been able to be in a good space emotionally and mentally about this. I will say about my treatment after that, I had pretty serious aphasia and cognitive challenges. I didn't drive for a year. My long-term memory has been challenged, short-term memory. But it's been amazing. It has come back more and more over time. I think we watched some of the slides about how the brain can rewire itself, and I've been very fortunate that way. I'm actually found myself to be safe driving. I went back and did another test with the driver tester, and they sent me safe to drive. So I've been moving myself around. I've been helping other patients and other organizations, mostly nonprofits focused on healthcare, to do their strategic planning, their fundraising. I'm helping to change the world again. So that's great. My personal conditions is that Temodar kept me stable for about 3 months after my craniotomy. In September of 2016, the tumor was found to be in aggression again. We changed things up, started on Avastin. Avastin has helped me stable for almost 1.5 years. It was just this last November that the MRI showed what had been a very small dot that you could make with the dot of a ballpoint pen, as I was described, that you could see. 2 MRIs before that. In November, it looked more like the side of a pea. So we knew it was time to take a new approach to my defense system. We did a CyberKnife a week of radiation to knock it back. We are remaining on Avastin, and maybe Dr. Cobb can tell more about the strategy we adopted after that. So we're doing Avastin, we did the CyberKnife. I am now using the Optune, which was not allowed when it was on Avastin as a trial. And then we are going back to the data that Dr. Cobbs found after my resection. They went to the biopsy and found what results they had found from experimental treatments to the I call it War Games. If you ever saw that movie. So made several replicas of my tumor in conditions as close to the conditions inside my brain, and tried treatment against that on several different treatments. We found that there are 3 of them that were effective in fighting against my tumor in the labs that wouldn't be too negative on my regular condition, and so that's what I'm taking. I'm taking Zoloft, Gold Flake, yeah, and the third I can't even remember. Okay, so that I'm 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks into getting that treatment right now. So we'll find out in another 6 weeks how that MRI continues. So that's my summary.
Thank you so much for being here. I'll be talking about that later. He's on a personalized trial using patients' own tumor-derived cancer stem cells that we screened against 76 compounds, and your top ones we picked for you. What do you think we could do better as physicians to help people getting through this process? I know you mentioned Robin. For those of you who are not here, we're very fortunate to have a social worker / psychotherapist who works with patients and their families, and I think that's really helpful. And because it's, like you said, one day you're a successful businessman, the next day you've got a glioblastoma, and you've got kids, and your whole world is like flipped upside down, and there's a lot of things to process. I'm sure that was helpful. What about, what other things can we do that would be helpful for you? And then after we kind of talk about this, maybe we'll take questions from people who might be watching on Facebook.
Well, I watched Tessa Jowell, a woman who's a member of the House of Lords in England. I don't know if you got a chance to see her speech. She spoke to the House of Lords just last week and explained her own experience with glioblastoma. She was diagnosed just about a month or two after I was. And she makes a passionate plea to the House of Lords that England should be spending more time on experimental treatment like you all are talking about here. So that's great. Half of her speech was on that treatment. The other half was on just her own personal experience. I just want to say what I think makes a big difference. I think it makes a difference for me is just the connections that I have with the people in this room. So Grace and Molly and Jamie and you and several other professionals in this room do a great job of. I feel like I have meaningful relationships with you people, and that makes a big difference to me. We sit twice a month downstairs with other patients and their caregivers who are experiencing this, and I think that personal connection really does make a difference. And what I don't know is how many patients are getting treated here that are missing on that opportunity, and I don't know how people are encouraged to engage in that way. I know I found myself that way. I found myself there, but I don't know if other people find themselves that way. So there might be another way that, as an institution, we can embrace people and find that connection together.
Well, I think you have a good point that it's critical for institutions taking care of patients with a selective problem like yours to have a team. And University of Washington has a great team. We have a good team. I do feel sorry for patients who may be out in areas where they don't have a sort of a comprehensive team that's taking care of this sort of not super rare, but kind of rare problem. And I think that's a great thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. Should we take any questions? Linda, are you going to do that or? Nobody's questioning me yet. That's good. Tell me about radiation and Temodar. How did that impact you?
Radiation and Temodar. I was told that there were side effects. I have been so fortunate that my side effects were so marginal. I had a great appetite the whole time. I did find that my sense of taste and smell changed dramatically, and I didn't know what was going to happen when I put new food in my mouth. And I did sleep a lot, but I was really fortunate there. One thing I will say is that Jamie and several of my family friends and my family members and friends, they all signed up for rides to my treatment every day. So there was somebody different at my treatment every single day. And the person at the reception desk would always have fun. Okay, now who are you to this today? So
you're lucky you have a team.
Yes. I was, again, I helped an author and local leader who wrote a book called Personal Safety Nets. I actually helped her do outreach with this book, saying how much people need to have a group of family and friends to take care of them when they need it. And she was one of the people I had to call after my diagnosis to say, whoops, I teach to hundreds of other people. I forgot to do it myself. But quickly pulled a group of people together, and it makes a big difference.
That's important to have a social network to help you. What about Avastin? Has that bothered you at all, or?
No, Avastin. I wondered if I was getting a sugar pill because no side effects. Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
How is the Optune? What is that like?
Optune is, I have to say, it's apparently some people had a much bigger challenge to carry around. I still thought this is kind of a hassle. Where do I put it? What do I do with it? I did use it for about 3 weeks back in 2016 before I went on to Avastin. And then I started again recently, and I'll say I think it makes a difference that I told myself I own this now. I'm not like a victim. When the man who came over to show me how to do this was standing behind me and showing my friends how to put it on, and I couldn't even hear what they were saying, I said, "You can't. That doesn't work. You got to come around. I'm your primary audience here. You got to show me how this worked. I need to own it." And I think it makes a difference to embrace it and own it that way. So.
Does anybody have any questions in the audience?
More for the panel of experts. My name is Tina Emerson Hoffman. I work with the Brain Cancer Initiative. We're a brain tumor patient services organization.
We're going to get you a microphone. 1 second.
So this is partly for my own education, since I communicate with the patients and their caregivers quite often every day. But I am getting a question about Avastin use and clinical trials. And what I don't understand, so I'm not able to communicate that to the patients we work with, what is it about Avastin that makes it, might make somebody ineligible for certain clinical trials? Like, what is it about the drug that would make somebody ineligible to participate?
I think that's a great question. There are some clinical trials that, for whatever reason, I know have put that as an exclusion criteria, but it doesn't make sense to me. I think, Jerome, can you answer that? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of it.
I want to try the mic.
A lot of it just has to do with how Avastin really changes the MRI. And we know how it changes the MRI, but because standard MRI is how most trials evaluate response, it can make it really hard to determine what the MRI is showing. So that's really just the practical reason why most trials exclude Avastin.
Okay.
Because Avastin is so commonly used, there are a small number of trials, there are starting to be more, that incorporate Avastin and either add something to it in combination, which is exciting. So hopefully people are finally starting to just see the reality of the situation.
I noticed that some of them will say they need 4 weeks or however many weeks from your last dose, and then there are some like they don't want you to have had it at all, which is very disappointing and disheartening.
And you know, some people just, they need it. Sometimes it controls symptoms in a way that steroids have not. So some people can't come off of the Avastin. But that's the main reason, is how it affects the imaging.
I can tell you from my experience with working with a company that has, you know, a brain tumor treatment, the people writing their clinical trial a few years ago, you know, they said, we absolutely are not going to have anyone on Avastin because how are we going to know if our drug is working? Which is, you know, makes sense.
Makes sense.
And there were, a few years ago, fewer places where almost everyone was put on Avastin. Some centers, they don't put as many people on Avastin. Some centers, everyone with recurrent GBM almost goes on Avastin. And I think places now are realizing Avastin is here to stay. It's part of the armamentarium. If you use that as an exclusion criteria, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And you're not going to have anyone on a clinical trial. So I think they're now reassessing that, maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question from Facebook for you, from Tiffany Rios. Does anybody know what would cause new onset gliosis of the cerebellum? Child is 18 and 7 years post full resection of fourth ventricle, ganglioblastoma. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. That was low grade. No radiation or chemotherapy agents were needed.
This might be a Jerome question as well. Gliomatosis of the cerebellum in someone with a ganglioglioma years out. I guess it's something that can happen.
You said gliosis, right? Not gliomatosis. Yeah, so that can be the hard thing with some of these is those are two very different things. Gliosis is just scar tissue. Gliosis is glial cells, not even glioma cells. That's their standard response to any kind of injury. You see gliosis after irradiation, you see it from surgical scar tissue, you see it from inflammation, you see it from a stroke. We generally think of gliosis as a benign process. Gliomatosis is where you have, diffuse infiltrative spread of a glioma tumor. So if this patient never had treatment, they could have gliosis from just surgical scarring. They could have it for any number of reasons. The reason, though, that you want to be careful is like several of our speakers spoke about, everything is very heterogeneous, not just within tumor, but in the area around it. You have areas around tumor cells on MRI that will have inflammation, edema, and gliosis or scar tissue. And it's actually kind of hard for the pathologist sometimes. Gliosis can be really weird looking, and astrocytoma cells can look like gliosis. So I don't know. But gliosis is just a generic term for scar tissue, and often it's a kind of benign scar.
Thank you.
Question? Yeah. Hi. Let me get you a microphone.
Hi, you talked about a personalized treatment program that you're a part of where they tested your tumor, was it against 76 different compounds and kind of sounds like a petri dish environment to see what you might respond best to. How does one get enrolled in that? How did that, are you special in some particular way, or is that available?
He's a very special patient.
Are you, clearly, but
No,
can we be as special as you?
this is every institution has sort of clinical trials that are national, and some institutions have kind of homemade clinical trials. We were fortunate enough to receive funding from the Ben and Catherine Ivey Foundation based on my predecessor, Greg Foltz, to do a clinical trial looking at glioblastoma cancer stem cells. And preliminary data suggested exposing them to hundreds of compounds, we might find compounds that are specifically potent against those tumors from any given patient. And based on that, this institution only has taken that into a small phase 1 clinical trial. We've enrolled 4 patients. He's number 4 out of 10 so far to be enrolled. So it's just here, and the requirement is that the tumor had to have been resected here, and the cells were grown in our lab and then exposed to compounds. And it was basically something that was adopted from the University of Washington, which developed a program for myeloma, and it was myeloma, I believe, yes, and they've had some striking success in that, and so the hope is eventually to have high throughput screening for patients' tumors and their tumor stem cells, which seem to be the most resistant to treatment, and come up with in our case, we came up with a 3-drug cocktail, arbitrary number of drugs, but we felt like sort of like an HIV, one HIV drug does one thing, but then there's resistance. But once you have more drugs, if they can be given safely in combination, you may have a better way to sort of box in the tumor. So it's a phase 1 looking at safety. So far, safety has not been an issue.
Okay. So you'll enroll 6 more patients?
Well, we've already enrolled 25 in terms of collecting tissue and testing the cells. And then the patients who qualify based on Karnofsky performance score, it's only given once the tumor has recurred after standard treatment.
I will say just for those who are thinking, who are a patient or a caregiver, my friend Jamie has a PhD and a professional following pharmaceutical industry, and he helped me sort of keep tabs of the trials at I forget the name of the website. There's a website.
Clinicaltrials.gov.
That's right. So, and there are great ways to slice and dice and figure out where are you, what are the conditions you're looking for, is it open or closed, that kind of thing. It's way more than I would ever spend my own time on tracking. If my time is short, that's not how I want to spend it. But I have great friends who help me do that, and I'm fortunate enough to be in Seattle, where honestly, every time everything keeps pointing back for me to Seattle with Swedish and Dr. Cobb. So that's my personal.
There are a lot of places also, obviously, in brain cancer is a great organization. I'm involved with Cancer Commons, which is another place for all kind of cancers. If you contact them, they can help guide you into see what clinical trials are available. I think there should be more, there should be more awareness of these wonderful resources for people to know. I do see a lot of patients who, it happens so quickly. You have surgery, next thing you know, you're on radiation and Timidar, and you didn't even know that there was a clinical trial out there. Or they come to us for our neuro-oncologists after they've had surgery, and they're downstream and have missed out an opportunity. So I wish there was a little more awareness of what's available for people up front, but there are things available. You just have to kind of dig around. But thanks to what Delanne and others have done, their patients are more aware of it. Delanne, you want?
I have a question. The clinical trial you were just talking about. Well, thank you. Where you're testing the tumor tissue against, did you say 76 different types of drugs?
Correct.
Do you have plans to expand that out to more?
Well, yeah, so, the way these things go is you do a phase 1, and you kind of, FDA approved that. We thought it was not going to be approved because when we submitted 4 years ago, it was totally crazy idea to do this 3 drugs at once. Now things are changing so fast. So far it's safe. We don't have efficacy data. It's going to be hard to get that from a phase 1. There's some suggestion that there's some exciting stuff going on. So yes, we would definitely want to expand it. What we really want to do is work with our colleagues at ISB and anyone else we can to reverse engineer why, Mr. Smith's tumor responds to these drugs, and figure out if genetics of the tumor will help predict that for the next patient. So,
Excellent.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ethan Russo. Thanks for coming and presenting to us, and congrats on your wonderful attitude towards this whole ordeal. Just a practical question. You were asleep for your surgery?
Yes.
Okay, so you didn't have brain mapping done?
Not that I'm aware of in that way.
I can't remember. It was 2 years ago. We may have done mapping, or I actually can't remember.
If the feedback is my verbal feedback, I remember Dr. Cobb's telling me that I think because of my aphasia and my inability to articulate clearly, that keeping me present was not going to be that helpful. I think that was the decision.
It may have been. A lot of times we'll do a functional MRI, and if there's no evidence of tumor in a critical area, we'll just have patients asleep and then just try to take the whole thing out. So I can't remember, actually. Sorry about that.
That's how I remember it.
To the best of your recollection, how was the aphasia right before versus right after?
Well, I do remember that Dr. Cobbs visited me either after my surgery that day or the following day and saying, "Oh my God, it's 100% better." It made a difference right off the bat. The pressure on my speech center had been relieved, and then that continued to improve really over the last months. So it is. I am now, when I sit with friends or family members, most people don't know that I have aphasia. And I know my shortcomings well enough that when a pothole is coming up, I know how to steer around it and say a different word. And I also know that my aphasia is auditory also. So if I hear a surprising word, a new name, a complicated number, much of this morning's talk I didn't pick up except for what I was reading on the screen. So I know that. Most of my friends and families don't know what I'm missing.
Very good.
question. 2 years ago at the first symposium like this, you had the researcher from Sweden who talked about the use of antivirals. I didn't hear anything really last year at the conference about that. Can you bring me up to date on where that is? And
Yes, it's been an interesting story. I just was on the phone with her a couple of days ago, so I've actually increased my collaboration with her group. Her group has been developed a technique to sequence the virus from the tumors, and our preliminary indication is that the virus is present, but it's a lot different than what everyone has been looking for. So we've got a lot of new kind of interesting things to go on for that. She has a paper submitted that's been under review for a long time now to publish her second round of data on patients who have taken valganciclovir or Valcyte in Stockholm at the Karolinska Institute. I think they have about 80 patients versus 160 controls. And from what she told me, it looks really good. The reviewers have requested that they have to do a lot of retrospective analysis for all these patients now to know whether their tumors were methylated or not, and all these kind of things that in some cases they didn't have for every patient. So it's taken them a long time to go back and try to satisfy all these reviewers' criticisms. But my understanding is she says if she can get all that done, they're going to try to publish this second round of paper, which, according to her, suggests that the antiviral drug has been beneficial.
it's interesting, you know, I'm here because my husband was diagnosed with glio 4 years ago. He just passed the 4-year mark and has not had a recurrence. He's had 2 surgeries, but no recurrence. And everybody asks, you know, why is he at this point? And he did the Valcyte, he did the Optune. I mean, he did their clinical trial with the immunotherapy. And so, and he did the standard treatment. So, you know, we don't know. But
well, that's the problem is some of the patients are on a lot of things. If he was on, the Northwest Biotherapeutics, is that the one he was in, DC, another immunotherapy? Well, good for him.
The clinical trial that was here, Dr. Cobbs, the
DC-Vax?
The DC-Vax.
That's Northwest
Yes. Oh, okay.
Biotherapeutics.
Yes.
Yep. So we don't know the results of that trial, and but I believe there is going to be more to come in terms of the viral work, but it's still quite controversial out there, and so until there's good evidence in the literature, I think it's not a standard treatment.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Does anybody have any questions?
I got a question. What would you tell all the caregivers out there that are here in terms of, having been through this experience for 2 years? What would you say that we need to do? Should we be more aggressive in pushing to get more patients on clinical trials? Should we, what should we be doing? Should we be fundraising more?
We should be researching more. Dame Jowl in England made a strong argument about the benefit that everyone should have access to. If time is short and your risks are already high, you should be able to make your own decisions about trying new things within judgment, right? But it seems like patients learn about new things long after the idea was hatched. So some active participation in the research is definitely something I would argue for.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I think the statistics are only 10% of patients get into clinical trials. Is that correct, Delanne? And I think lower than that.
Yeah, but I'm not the expert.
Yeah, I think we could do a better job, but, well, Derek, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us here and telling everyone your story, and keep up the good work.
Thank you for taking the time. It's an honor.